This is the Good Fire Podcast. Stories of Indigenous fire stewardship, cultural and social empowerment, and environmental integrity. Hey folks, welcome back. Episode 8 is coming at you. We're going to South America. Guyana's in South America, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, I had to double check. Pretty sure I knew that, right? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to Guyana, speaking to some folks down there and what's going on, and the incredible lengths one has to go to find internet in order to do this podcast. So we are very, very thankful for people trying to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, Guyana, in doing the background research for this episode, I learned a lot about the country. It's not often one of the South American countries that you hear about a lot. And so, but it's, I guess, the second most forested country in South America. And really fire is just a part of life there for many other, for many of the communities. And so it was really great to talk to them. And so this episode features Kayla, who's a research scientist doing her PhD right now, and her work that she's doing with some of the nations there. And then Nicolas, who's a local Indigenous man who's been helping and advising her on her research. He participated as well. And so it was great. We talk about it, but ended up having to commute quite a ways to come out during rainy season. So we super appreciate that so much that he made all this effort to appear on the podcast. And yeah, it was just great for me to just learn about, it's kind of like the Africa, the Zimbabwe episode, just learning about the country and the Indigenous groups and how they use fire and how it's so important to them. And I mean, all have gone through a kind of a history of colonization, but the fire management has been different. Like in Guyana as well, they don't really have that huge suppression or, fire response like we do in Canada. So for me, it was super neat to hear about that. And he talks a little bit about different types of burning that I hadn't heard of, like burning to help promote iguana, which was one that I thought was super cool along the riverbanks. Yeah. So unfortunately for this one, like Matt was saying, that the audio isn't great. Normally we use like a platform for podcasting to record the episodes. But for this one, we actually ended up, the beginning, we tried to use Zencaster, but it was too difficult for his like bandwidth. So we ended up recording using WhatsApp. And so the audio is not as good. It totally stresses Matt out. I know. I'm sure the second I told him we recorded on WhatsApp, he got very stressed, but
I wasn't excited.
What I mean? Yeah, I know. But, we did our best, and I wanted to make sure that this one gets featured because I know what an effort Nicolas and Kayla both made to come on the podcast. And so, give it a listen. Let us know what you think. And again, apologies for that the audio's not quite as great on this one, but I can promise you that the content is fantastic.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. So, let's jump right into it. Here we go.
Okay, so hey everyone, I'm here today with Nicolas and Kayla. So we're going to learn about Guyana and fire, which I'm really excited. So Nicolas, we're going to go to you first. If you could just give an introduction of yourself and then chat a little about the use of fire in your region.
Okay, well, my name is Nicolas Cyril. I am a farmer, but I work part-time with SRDC, which is the legal district council that governs Cardinal community. And also, I work part-time with SRC, which is a grassroots conservation organization. And we've been working with the red siskins, monitoring the red siskins and doing a population estimate. But as of now, because of the rains, we have stopped. And because of the rain is heavy at this time, and we cannot go to the fields to do our work. When the rain stops, it will be like sometime in September, then we resume back to start back to monitor the systems.
Yeah, thanks, Nicolas. And can you describe basically your use of fire in your area and how your Indigenous community uses fire?
Fire in our territory has been used from since time immemorial, and we continue to use that fire for various reasons. For burning our farm, which is slash and burn, burning for for cattle to graze, burn around the bush islands to make fire break, burn your road because there are snakes on the road that you can clear your road to go to the farm. Using fire for ceremonial purposes. We can use some fires to cast out evil spirits. So these are some of the reasons why we use fire, and fire plays a very important role in our daily lives because we continue to use fire as firewood to make our farine, our cassava bread, boil our casrib, and these other things. So yes, we continue to use fire daily.
Great. And so, Nicolas, can you just paint to me a picture of what your community looks like? So, for example, when you walk out the door of your house, what's the landscape like around you?
The landscape around in Katunurup is mostly small bush islands. It is the only village found in South Central that you can find bush islands. Katunar, meaning Wapishan, is bush island. And then the English came around, they call it Katunurup. So going to the farm, it is coming out from your house. It's like mostly open savanna and hills and valleys. You'll find some swamps between. So it's mostly savanna.
And so I understand that there's a protected area. Are you in that protected area, or are you kind of bordering on it? If, for example, in Canada, most of our protected areas are ones that exclude Indigenous communities. So Indigenous people can't live in those areas. So I'm wondering, what's it like where you are?
Where I am in the geographical area, I am not part of the protected area. But there are other villages bordering the protected area that live close to the protected area, and but I'm not really like close like those other villages. Tan Creek, Rupunao, Shulinab. So those are some of the villages that border the protected area.
And how many people are in your village? Like, what's the population there?
The population is 400. And the last count was 480. Mm-hmm. It maybe now updating them, it could be like nearly 500 now. Okay. But in general, the territory could be like 8,000 in the whole territory.
Okay, and Kayla was saying that you had to come on quite a journey to get into internet for this podcast recording. Can you describe what it's like? So I understand you there's bus access to your community.
Yes, the mode of transportation here, there are tractors, there are motorbikes, minibuses. Before, like in the 50s, there were not those things yet. You had to go on horse, you had to walk, you had to go on bicycle. But at this time of the year, it is the mid of the rainy season, and it's very difficult to traverse at this time of the year because of the rain.
My village is situated very far from the city here. The city here is Lethem, which is the border. Right across the Takutu is Bongfin, across Brazil. It is very far. It is situated in South Central, but there is more. If you go down to the deep south, there's more villages to the deep south. It's about 400 and something miles from the capital city of Guyana. It's very far. The road is very bad at this time because of the weather. As I said before, this time of the year is the mid part of the rainy season. So I came out here. We actually take 3.5 hours with a minibus this morning because the road was very bad. The rain was falling whole time when we left the village. So yes, it is a remote place. People normally don't really come there too much, like to visit. For example, like the people from the cabinet, the ministry, sometimes they come around, yes, but at this time it is not advisable because the road is bad at this time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for making the time and coming out. I was saying to Kayla before you could hear us well, that most of the nations, that get a lot of attention for burning are, Canada, Australia, US. And that's what most of our podcast episodes have focused on. But I know that there is such important Indigenous burning practices that happen in other countries. So I'm so glad that you guys both made the time to come and chat about it. So Kayla, maybe we'll jump to you now. And if you'd like to give us a introduction to yourself, and then maybe just a brief background of the work that you're doing on wildfire and Indigenous peoples and burning. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Amy. So my name is Kayla de Freitas. I grew up in the Rupununi, in the South Rupununi, which is a savanna area, mainly savanna, but there is some forest around. I grew up on a ranch called Dadanawa, which is about 7 miles away from Nicolas's village, from Katnarab, and I actually attended school there and another village in Sand Creek before going on to finish my secondary school in the coastal area, which is in Georgetown, and then going abroad for my university education. But I always go back to the Rupununi. And so when this PhD call came up, it was being advertised. There is the Leverhulme Center for Wildfire Environment and Society. I saw the call, and I had just finished my master's, and I said, I don't really want to do any other research or studies. And people kept sending this to me, and I think about the 6th person sent it to me, and I said, you know what, I'm going to apply. And I applied, and I ended up finding out that Jay Mystery was going to be my supervisor. And she was not just a researcher in fire, but she was also done a lot of research in fire in my region, so in Venezuela and in Brazil and in Guyana. So I got pretty excited about that. So that's how I started my journey with looking at fire management. So currently my focus is on the changing practices of Indigenous fire management and what that means for local fire governance. So I focus on understanding the history of people in the Rupununi and natural resource use and management, including fire, because that's pretty integral to resource use and landscape management. So what I wanted to do was identify some changes and shifts that have occurred in the burning practices and resource use, including things like the way that communities govern, and look at how the contemporary practices of fire use and understand the land tenure situation and what tensions were arising about the approaches or perceptions of how fire should be managed. Say, for example, between a protected area, which we have there, the Kanaku Mountains protected area, and the community, or between community members themselves. This leads into my last focus, which was what impact has these changes had on burning practices and also the differing approaches to fire management and what this has had on Indigenous fire governance. So I've had 2 sites. I worked in Shulanab, which is, as Nicolas mentioned, is a mixed village, Makushi and Wapichan. And it is close to the protected area, to the Kanaku Mountains protected area, but it's based in the savannah. But they were originally like a forest people from the interviews and the histories. And they slowly came out of the forest into using savannah more often because of the church and school, and as things changed, right? So the settlement patterns changed. With Shulanab, what's interesting there is they've been involved in several projects of research on Indigenous use of fire. So, for example, they've done fire research to support National Forest Fire Management Plan. They were involved in a research led by the South Rupununi District Council, looking at how Indigenous peoples use fire, and that was to actually inform the Wapichan Fire Management Plan. So the SRDC that Nicolas mentioned created a management plan for the territory, which included fire management as one part of it. Lately, they were involved in a Red Plus project to see how communities, Indigenous communities specifically, could opt in to the Red Plus agreement that Guyana has to see how they could work to manage fire, to look to manage carbon emissions, basically. And the second site that I had is Nicolas's village, which is Katnarab, which has not really been involved directly in fire management projects by like external projects. So I focused there more on customary and traditional management and looking at sort of changes between, as Nicolas mentioned as well, looking at the elders, sort of middle-aged people, youths, looking at what kind of perceptions there were on fire management. Basically looking at it in today's reality. So Katnarab is a savanna community, but they have a different forest system. So Shilonab's closer to the protected area, which has a bigger forest going up, while Katnarab has what we call bush islands, which are these like forest islands basically in the savanna. And they have limited sort of forests, so they have a different approach to fire management. So I wanted to sort of compare those two sites. Yeah, that's my research.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I'm so excited that you're focusing on this area. And of course, working with Jay, who's a friend of mine and was in our season 1 of Good Fire, talking about her research too. And so just for folks listening too, if you're like myself, my understanding, unfortunately, of fire in South America, it was very low. And so reading about Guyana, I found out that it's the second most forested country in South America, and that there's a range of wildfires. Most are actually human caused, although some are lightning, and that there is I think that the most fires that you guys had in a year was in 2015, where there was about 1,800 fires. And last year, in 2021, was a bit lower. You didn't have quite as many fires. But I'm just wondering, Nicolas, if you could give us maybe some background on, what it's like for you where you are, what fire management is like. Are you allowed to burn where you want to? For me, in my nation, we can't burn wherever we want. There's pretty strict government control still. So yeah, just if you could give us a bit of background there.
Yes, you can be allowed to burn in the village because there are systems in place regarding fire in the communities. For example, burning for your farm, you are allowed to burn. Burning around the bush islands to make fire breaks, yes. Burning for your animals, yes. Burning to clear your path road from snakes, yes. So you are allowed to burn on a village level. And regarding your question regarding the government, I'm not too sure because the city is situated on the coast, and these places where we live is savanna area. So I'm not too sure if there's any kind of policy regarding fire from the government.
Yeah, so he's just made a couple points there that I will just build upon. So in Guyana, the way that the land tenure system is set up for Indigenous communities, they operate semi-autonomously in a way. So you do have a lot of say over what happens on your titled land, basically. So communities are allowed to burn. And they're allowed to make their own rules concerning resource governance, including fire. It gets a little complicated when it's there's lots of different land tenure systems. There's protected areas. There's some state lands, basically. There's not a lot of private lands in this area, but there is some. But the state lands, they're owned by the government, but a lot of the communities, they have extension land claims into these areas. So the extension claims are over what the Wapchan claim as territorial land. And even on those state lands, in the laws and the regulations of Guyana, Indigenous peoples are allowed to carry out customary practices as long as it's sustainable. I think just to speak a little bit quickly on that as well, there is no national fire policy in Guyana. So it was developed a bit different from the other sort of colonial countries that the British were involved in terms of, because of the remoteness of where the Rupununi is, where most of the kind of fire happens, which is a savanna landscape. And I'm sure, as you know, chatting with Jay and others, savannas are not only flammable, but they're fire dependent as well. There were no kind of real interest in creating fire policies because I think they never really had an issue with fire at the beginning. So this is a unique case in the South Rupununi, where there's this indigenous group of people, which is the Wapchan and the SRDC, sort of trying to create a local fire policy that's appropriate for their landscape. That's something I think that's a little bit different from what's been happening globally as well. So he mentioned that the policy, there's no fire policy, and that's absolutely true. I think because of the remoteness of that area historically, there was not a lot of access to the Rupununi for a very long time. And when the access did happen, it's still a very rough and long journey to get there. So for an example, for Nicolas to come out to be able to do this interview, that's normally in the dry season, it's about a 2 to 3 hour journey, but in the rainy season, it takes 3 to 4 hours, depending on the road. And that's only 60 miles, roughly. So you could think about 60 miles in terms of you moving about in Canada or in the UK. That's not very far, but the terrain's kind of rough. So the communities have a lot of say over their territory and their land title of what they can and cannot do. And they make a lot of the rules about fire at that local level.
Thanks, Kayla. I think, so just a question too, is there in this region where Nicolas is there a problem with the big wildfires like we're seeing in Canada? Like, do they have out of control fires that they have to, firefight and other things? Or is it mostly just the application of fire that they're putting on the ground?
I think we have to address first, like, for example, yes, of course, there has been wildfires historically, but they're usually linked to major drought events. So, for example, you mentioned earlier in the conversation 2015 and way less fires in now. And that's linked to severe sort of dry spells. I just want to speak a little bit on this before I answer the next part of your question. So in 2019 report, the Guyana Forestry Commission puts out these reports every year. And for the longest time in Guyana, mining has been the lead cause of deforestation. So when they did all the data analysis and the satellite imagery, mining is the lead cause of deforestation. But for the first time in 2018, I think, which is after a severe sort of drought spell, that's around the same time that the Amazonian fires were kind of going on and was making a big deal in the media. We had, for the first time in Guyana, deforestation leading by fire. So fire-led deforestation. And that kind of, according to someone in my interviews, like clicked off some alarm bells for the government to wanting to create some sort of fire policy for Guyana because of this. And one of the areas where there were a lot of fires were in the Rupununi. But of course, it didn't really hit that deep forest the way the Amazonian fires did. It hit like a lot of the edges, riverine areas, which can get quite dry. I'm sorry, just remind me the second part of your question again. After the wildfire? I think I was just asking where the majority of fires come from in the region. Like, is it, the out of control fire? Or is it good fire that, that Nicolas and his community are putting on the ground? Mm-hmm. So I think, there is, it really depends, on the weather. So the district council there in the Wapchan, they have a seasonal fire calendar that was developed through a study in 2011. And that did a lot of interviews and with a lot of people, like elders, talking about the right time to burn and where to put fire on the landscape and when, what's the right timing and the different reasons you put fire on the landscape for. But what has happened is the climate shifts have made it kind of a little harder for a lot of people to know when would be a good time to burn. So a lot of the wildfires that were happening back in, so for example, the one of the lead cause of the deforestation, like I mentioned, is during the drier spell. And the Guyana Forestry Commission identified it as escaped farm fires. But it's kind of difficult to tell because the ground truthing that they are doing is things like flyovers. So it's a bit difficult to actually understand where these fires do come from. But I would say it's fair to say that a lot of the fires that end up being wildfires come from some sort of anthropogenic use. But in my opinion, it wouldn't be from those protective sort of fires that are being done around the community areas. These most wildfires are that get started like this would probably be where there's not a lot of people around, so that if there is fire there's a lot of fuel build up there already because there's not people using and living in that landscape. So any fire there becomes possibly a dangerous fire.
So Kayla, I'm just wondering if you can give, so you had given before an overview of the research that you're doing. Can you just describe it a little bit more? So are you working with kind of community elders and I think Nicolas was saying people that are kind of in their middle age too, to kind of understand burning and governance in the area. I'm just wondering, like, when you're in the field doing your research, what does a day look like for you?
So I work with two communities. I'll talk about my day in Qatar because that's where Nicolas and I work. So Nicolas helped me with just general logistics, but also, of course, knowing who to speak to, kind of helping guide kind of what areas I should discuss, things like this. So our typical day would be waking up. I usually wake up 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, have some breakfast, and Nicolas would come and pick me up on his motorbike, maybe about 7 or 8, depending on who we were going to go see. And we would go off across the terrain on the motorbike. And it was really nice because Nicolas would be talking all the time. So as we would be driving past like a bush island or a swamp, he'd be talking about what the bush island name was, the story that came from there. We'd be crossing where like the brown areas was. He'd be talking about, when that area burned and why it was burned. So we'd usually end up going to someone's house, and the custom there is when you arrive, usually people offer you something, some food or drink, so you end up having an informal kind of discussion first, and hanging out with people before you start the interviews. So I think most of those type of days when I was doing those types of interviews, it was really nice because, you got to chat with people and hear about informal things about life first before talking about fire. Because believe it or not, fire is not like the most important thing in people's lives. So we also did a lot of farm visits. We went to, for example, Nicolas took me when he was burning his farm. So we walked through the farm when we were burning, and he explained how people would burn, how long they would wait, depending on the type of vegetation it was, if it was a second growth farm, if it was a maiden farm or an old growth farm. The type of songs or the type of things that people would say and prayers people would say in their farms to talk about helping the fire burn clean, things like that. So, I think the thing that I love about this type of research is it's not just going in and just talking about people, but it's actually hanging out with people and getting to know people on a personal sort of level. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in that area, but I hadn't really lived there in a while. I'd been in and out and living in Latam, which is that town that Nicolas is in at the moment. It was really nice to be able to reconnect with people that I went to school with, things like that. So it was really meaningful for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a project that was meant to be for you. Definitely. So I'm just wondering, Nicolas, too, so about burning in your community, I'm just wondering who makes the decisions about kind of when and where to burn?
In villages, there are village councils, there are the authorities of the village. They have the show, and it depends on how many councillors, how many population the village has. You would have 10 councillors, deputy, the secretary. So they hold their meetings on a monthly basis, and they hold their sit-in, the village council sit-in, and then they hold their village general meeting every month. So they are the ones that make decisions, and they are the ones to guide, but the villagers are the ones who make decisions in general. So we make decisions collectively. So at that general meeting, they will be having an awareness session regarding fire and who will be responsible for that bush island, where to burn, where not to burn. Because at the moment, we are doing Antita, we are put our village for an Antita conservation zone. So So there are places that are not supposed to be burned where these animals stay. But there are other places that, for example, myself, where I live, I would burn on a rotational basis, like a small patch burning for my animals. So the British Council makes the decision with the people endorses that in that.
Okay, interesting. I know for many of the nations here, some of them have actually like a fire keeping family. So one family that's kind of responsible for burning and making the decisions about burning around the community. I haven't heard of, unfortunately, I think that people would like to get to that kind of communal decision making level, but I haven't heard of a nation here that does that yet.
Yeah, but this, we live, we have our land title. We're at the process of getting our land titled, and the land will be owned by the villagers. So in general, the British Council and the people make decisions collectively.
So I was reading too about and tell me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but the Kanuku Mountains Protected Area, is that the proper pronunciation?
Yes, you're.
I'm doing okay. Okay. So I was reading there that about for Guyana that 53% of bird species and 70% of mammals live in that area, which I actually found to be pretty shocking that it's that it's that many kind of in that protected area.
It is a very huge mountain range, and people have not really been exploring it too much. But yes, it is a fact that there is so much of bird species like the endangered cock of the rock that lives there. You have the red siskin, that is another endangered species. You have the tapir. You have other animals that are living there. But I must also inform you that we as Indigenous people here, we live off of the land. We use wild game as food also, but we are developing some guidelines, rules and guidelines of we should use, but use in a sustainable way. Yes.
Okay. And you said you have a farm, Nicolas. What kind of animals do you have on your farm there?
We have the agouti, you have the nine-banded armadillo, you have the laba, you have birds, and then you have the baboon.
Yeah, the farms there, Amy, that he's referring to is not like, Nicolas does have cattle as well. He has some cows and pigs and things like that. But the farm he's talking about that he depends on is the like cassava and crop farm in the forest.
Okay, I love that description. I know here they talk about like the forest as an orchard or agriculture, so it sounds like kind of a similar terminology there. Great. So, Kayla, can you describe a bit more about with your research? So you were talking about the Indigenous fire governance that you're looking at. Can you just maybe let us know some of your initial findings there, or maybe if there's any barriers or anything that are coming up to Indigenous people and using fire in that area of Guyana?
Yeah, sure. So I think, for example, Nicolas had mentioned how management was changing a little bit in the communities. I think there's been like a little trend towards more direct management, where the council and the community collectively are trying to make more decisions for the community at large. And I think fire has been in the past as one of my interviews sort of stated, like in the past, management was just a byproduct of lifestyle in a way. So the fire was managed as part of everyday life, basically. So you'd burn when you'd be walking towards going fishing, as Nicolas mentioned, for example, because of snakes or something like that, but creating these patchy sort of burns on the landscape that would protect against later dry season fires. And I think as conservation and more research started coming in and seeing the benefit of these types of practices, there's been a drive towards trying to do that, bring those practices back on a more direct management approach rather than just part of the lifestyle. So you're doing protective burns more often, for example. In the past, I think fire, for example, hunting was done in a group. This is mostly for the chasing game. Mm-hmm. This practice still exists, but less people kind of want to talk about it because I think sometimes people think that it's been discussed by external sort of people as not a good practice to do. But there isn't that communal interaction anymore to go chasing animals and burning. But individuals or small groups still kind of do it. And I think some of the discussions, particularly in Shulunab, the dying out of this practice was linked to two things. The death or the passing of elders with key knowledge. But it was also a type of governance and leadership that was more or less replaced, that got tied more to electoral systems. So, for example, what I mean by this is traditionally, if you were a leader, you're a leader for a long time with no cutoff points, unless the community said, to change you or you hand over to someone else. But there's been a change. I can't really say exactly. Maybe Nicolas might be able to say when this change started to happen. But the government of Guyana now, it's tied into the electoral system, so the government changes every 3 years. So secondly, it was tied to change in communal values as well and the way leaders communicate with their people. So in Shulunab, I explained when they wanted to do a group burn for hunting, the leader would decide a few days in advance and they would go house to house and tell everyone, we're planning to do this, get your people ready. And this is the date we're doing this. And there was one person that was responsible for burning, for example, lighting that fire. And the rest of the people would be waiting for the game that would get chased out. But now the way that people have communicated has changed. So I think this is one of the things that started coming out from my work in Shulunab.
Yeah, that using fire for game hunting is so fascinating to me because my family used to use fire to help with the buffalo hunt as well. And so, yeah, it's just interesting that it's like very kind of similar practices, although very different by Indigenous people worldwide. So, Nicolas, did you want to add anything?
Yes, it was in 2006 when they wrote the Amendment Act. That was the time when they have this clause in the act saying that you shall put on this sort of 2 terms, which is 3 years per term, and then he cannot stay there anymore. So things have changed a lot in recent times. Regarding like modern technology, people started to go to school, secondary schools, and started kind of move away a bit from traditional hunting, farming, and so like mostly kind of go for job opportunities now. And I think there's a little bit of a kind of move away from the old or the ancient way of life. Because fire before, the population started to grow before before like the 50s, there were not much people. Then in the 1900s, when the priests came around, most of the people used to live in the mountains. And then the Jesuits came. They started to come down for the church, then the school. So you guys kind of move away from your original home and then coming out to the savannah. So now you have churches, you have schools, you have health posts in these villages now. So plus the modern technology now, the computer and the phone and the people, the kids are now into it. So slowly and slowly they're kind of moving away from their original way of life. But I think that's something normal you have to live with, and not forgetting your way of life. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's similar here in the podcast. We've had quite a few elders talk about just their kind of sadness, I guess, at the lack of youth interest in fire and burning. But I think here in Canada, because we've been having like worse fire events, basically what's happening is I think that many Indigenous youth here now are kind of getting reinterested in fire and burning and how their ancestors used to practice on the land.
I think that's quite amazing because I found in Qatar, among the youth group actually specifically, that they were still quite, there was still a lot of knowledge. I think it depends on the interest of their parents as well in transmitting that knowledge, because I found that the youth, like the younger people who grew up with their grandparents, for example, they had a lot more traditional knowledge, not just about burning practices and fire, but about farming and hunting, like Nicolas said. But the youths that grew up with their parents, which would have had more of that influence from school and the church, and so there was a period of time when the conversion started happening and formal education started happening, that people were told a similar kind of history. Not you couldn't really speak your language, this kind of thing. You were sort of made to feel ashamed of being Indigenous in a way. And I think that that's coming to a shift now again. That's flipping back, whereas there's this resurgence of sort of pride within your knowledge, but also as Indigenous peoples knowing that land like no other people know it, right? That area that you live in, and the knowledge that you have is valuable, and an increasing recognition at the global scale of what Indigenous peoples contribute to things like resource management and conservation without ever calling it those terms. And I think organizations like the SRCS and the SRDC, which Nicolas is involved in, has played a big part in trying to get youths interested in that type of knowledge again. So I think it also really depends on not just the youth interest, but also the interest from the elders to continue to push that. Because I think as well, there's like a theory practical divide, if you will. So you can talk all you want about traditional knowledge, but if you have sort of moved away from that lifestyle, it's very hard to like practically understand it, because so much of that knowledge about fire and fire use and farming and hunting is learned by doing and by living there and living that life. So I think that the theory and the practice like needs to be, reconnected in a way, which I think is what a lot of people are trying to do at the moment.
Yeah, great point, Kayla, about that. I think I agree with you. You can't just really read it in a book or learn it at a workshop. Like for us, for burning, it's based on knowing when to burn. It's just based on your observations of the land around you where you're living. So if you don't live there or, aren't out observing, it becomes very difficult to know anything about fire.
Yeah, and like Nicolas may have forgotten this, but he'll tell you as soon as I tell this story. I was there I started going in Cardinal in October, and he was speaking about how funny the weather was the whole dry season. That it was a little weird because the rains was kind of coming off and on, and it wasn't a proper dry season. And he had spoken to his parents and a couple of elder people, and he said, this is going to be a dry season like the last year, where it was kind of wet and a lot of people didn't get to burn their farms or burn the area properly. So he burned early, and I think the day after, or 2 days after, Nicolas, was it that the big rain started to come after you burned?
Yeah, 2 days after.
Yeah. So, he just caught that weather, and that was because of his conversations with people around who knew how to sort of judge that something funny was going on.
Yeah, sounds like you caught the burn window there. Perfect, Nicolas.
Kayla had some nice videos of the fire when the fire was burning the farm.
Yeah, nice. So after you do a burn, Nicolas, how do you know basically that you achieved what you wanted to achieve? Like, I know that's kind of a loaded question, but I mean, like, here, if we're burning for raspberries or something like that, sometimes if you accidentally burn too hot or too cool, you don't get the effects that you want after. So I'm just wondering for you, like for that burn, did you achieve what you wanted to through it?
Well, on the farming side, it all depends on how dry the weather is. And when you fell, you at least give it a month before it is kind of dry. And then we have no weather system here. You just judge by your own judgment. Okay, today I'm going to go and burn. But the time of the burn is very important, like midday, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, when the place is very hot. So the idea is to burn the leaves, and then after that you will still have to cut the limbs of the trees, and then again you will still have to pile it up and burn it, or use as firewood, or use up all the materials. But of course, you have to extract all the useful materials before you burn. Here in the savannah, it's also the same. You would look at an area where it needs to be burned. Of course, you have to do patch burning to avoid the wildfires. According to my observation here, there was no kind of wildfire for the longest time, and I couldn't remember recalling the wildfire in Brazil, where the jungle was burning for months. Don't think we had any of those kind of wildfires in Guyana, to my knowledge. So you would have to use your own judgment in the savannah, in the farms. Everything depends on the traditional knowledge passed down from the elders. So everything that we do that was passed on from our grandparents, we also follow that their footsteps. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Nicolas. So I'm wondering too, so just mentioning Brazil there, I mean, Brazil up here has been in the news quite a bit about their, basically a lot of the burning that's been going on there. That's mostly like deforestation, and for, industrial activity. Are you having the same kind of issues in, Guyana, or is it, I read there that it's still more of kind of an quote unquote, untouched wilderness, although it's probably touched all over by Indigenous peoples. But are you having the same industrial pressures there?
I think it happens like mostly on the coast where the timber industry is active for lumber to export for houses and so. But I think there is a system in place where they only harvest that tree that has been could be harvested. The size of the tree and the age of the tree and so forth. I think they're using it in a sustainable way. But as of this side coming down to the south, I think is very untouched. It's still pristine forest.
If I could just add to that, we haven't had the same kind of pressures the way that Brazil has in terms of large scale, maybe like agricultural sort of mega businesses, things like that happening. But there is a conversation and a talk about like opening up the savanna lands the way that Brazil has in Roraima for things like soybeans, just to sort of grow investment in the country. They have tried to do it like in the north. They've put in a mega sort of farm there. It was not very successful, even though they had like a lot of investment. Because, the savanna lands are not very arable. Less than 1% of the soils are that can be planted. But there is an economic sort of push and conversation within the government about opening up that area for these types of pressures. And Nicolas can also speak to this, but there's also some mining as well going on in the area. And he's worked with teams that have had to like monitor sort of water quality, things like that. The South Carolina District Council has been working on monitoring water quality and looking at any illegal mining and things like that happening. Isn't at a large scale, but it's something always worth sort of flagging. But Guyana doesn't really have the same policies that Brazil does. And at least in terms of lip service, there's a lot of respect for what Indigenous peoples do, I think, like at the government level. But, sometimes it's always translated to the ground because there's always this perception, like if I could just bring it back to fire, as I mentioned, government will pay lip service to Indigenous sort of traditional knowledge and practices in interviews they have or even in reports. But they also paradoxically, in the same conversation, will flip it to mitigating fire risk or fighting fire, or to some extent the need for fire suppression. So while there is a shift in recognition, like on the important role that Indigenous peoples play in managing fire at the landscape level, fire sort of crosses ecological boundaries and tenure lines. So there's still like this opinion that fire is something that needs to be fought rather than like lived with and managed. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Similar sentiment up here as well. So, Kayla, I had read on the 11th Room website there that you and Jay were in Guyana for, I think, some meetings or something. Can you let us know what happened there, what you both were doing in the area?
Yeah, so I was in the middle of my field work. We actually visited Nicolas at his home as well and swam. He has a really nice lake right next to his house. So we did that. But we also attended a meeting with the South Rupununi District Council. So they were formed kind of to represent, because the villages are quite scattered. And so the SRDC was formed to represent like a collective interest of the Wapichan people and the South Rupununi people, which include Makushi and some sort of Waiwai, but to lesser extent. And we were there to talk about their sort of plans for management. Remember, I explained that there was a territorial plan. In English, it's thinking together for those coming behind us. That's what it's called.
Okay.
And it's a management plan for the territory that's currently being updated. And some of the work that Nicolas is doing that he mentioned on wildlife is going to be also included within that management plan. And part of that is fire. So we were sort of meeting with them to kind of see what their plans were for fire management at the landscape level. Because one of the villages I was working in, which is Shulanap, not the one that Nicolas is from, has had a Red Plus project. And that project was supposed to show how communities, we have a Red Plus agreement with Norway, Guyana. So we put up our forests, and Norway gives us a certain amount of money to keep deforestation below a certain level. That's the small shortness of it. There's a lot of criticism in the beginning about how will Indigenous peoples, who are the people who live in these areas, benefit from this agreement. So there's this thing that they call opt-in created. So the Indigenous communities could opt in and put their lands and their forests up for inclusion in this system and get some kind of benefit. So this Red Plus project in Shulanap was centered on fire community management, community fire management. And it was a way to show how communities could manage fire and then sort of opt into Red Plus and get benefits from it. It was kind of poorly designed. There was no sustainability or no continuity afterwards. But the meeting we had was to kind of discuss what the hopes were for that project. And the idea was, because the SRDC had already created a local policy, I would call it, based on customary laws, but also something I'd like to think to, well, I'll talk a little bit about that later, so not to confuse things. Yeah, a local policy, I guess. So they were saying that they had hoped that would be a lot more sort of based on traditional sort of fire management, but the project had brought in some people from Brazil, I think from Mato Grosso, who are like bomberos, firefighters. And while it did focus a little bit on traditional knowledge, the seasonal cycle was a little different there. So they also focused a lot on mitigation, fire fighting and suppression, as well as some sort of traditional knowledge. But the hopes for that project was that it would be upscaled because it's a very large area, the South Rupununi. And while landscape management of fire is important, the communities have sort of ownership and say, I guess, over what happens on their titled land. Legally, that's what they have a say on. But the SRDC was trying to do it at a larger level. So the plan was that each community would create a fire management plan based on their kind of ecological reality, I guess. Because some communities are closer to the forest, some are in the middle of the savannah, some have forest islands or bush islands like listed. So the idea was each of them would create like a fire management plan suited to their area that would feed into like a larger fire management plan at the territorial level. So we were there just to discuss how my research could possibly feed into that management plan when I was done. Also, what sort of help we could offer as well.
Yeah. So Kayla, when you're saying fire management plan, so just because here in Canada, obviously the fire management plans are generally focused a lot on suppression. So I'm just wondering there, like, putting the fire out. So I'm just wondering there what a fire management plan would entail.
So for Shulanap, so there's no like written fire management plan because as I mentioned earlier, most of the stuff was part of lifestyle management, was part of life. The management plans that I created focused a lot on the on the calendar. So, for example, the right months to burn, and looking at how to control burning practices when you're doing your farms, like what are the steps to take, things like that. But for Sholenab, the fire management plan focused on the role of a committee that they created through the project, a fire management committee or a fire brigade that, would fight savanna fires mainly. They didn't have the equipment or the finances or anything to be able to fight any forest fires. But they were also responsible for doing prescribed burning, I guess. So burning around the farming areas, around anywhere that they deemed to be of a fire risk. But interestingly, what kind of started to evolve from that, and this was not part of the project, but kind of came out from what the community saw as need, was helping farmers burn during very dry times. So, for example, when they were working, this is in 2019, they were helping people burn during the very dry spells. There's this increased chance of escape. So even when everyone's sort of put down the farm and it's dried and you're ready to burn, people also sweep around the edge of the farm. So to clean like a fire break or a fire path so the fire doesn't cross. But in dry times, when there's a lot of wind, fire can still cross with sparks or anything else like that. Any little dry piece of wood, it's gone, and might cause some damage in the forest. But the fire brigade ended up helping those farmers control fire during that dry time. And out of that came that recommendation that while it was a really good idea to have a fire committee after the project ended and the funding stopped, there was no sort of continuity. So we were also looking at, they do have a written fire management plan, but looking at rewriting that or reorganizing how they would approach the fire management in terms of what they thought was more important. So that came out as something that would be important. So rather than working all the time, they would be working during, helping burn during times that they perceived as more dangerous or more threatening, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So Nicolas, just what has your involvement been like in creating the fire management plan or being involved kind of on the side there?
In general, as I said here, it all depends on the weather to create your management plan. Right now, the fire, you can't burn fire now because the rains are here. And then coming on to August, September, there you can start to make your fire breaks because this wouldn't be too dry yet. Then coming on to August, the same September, yes, you can burn for the iguanas along the river. Coming on to October, November, you start cutting down your farm. And then you start burning. Then you have a little small rainy season between Christmas where the turtles will lay their eggs. And then you get another dry spell again up to March. But there's something to do with climate change also. Rains have been falling. So there's a bit of a change in the weather pattern here also. So that's how we kind of manage our fires regarding how we do it in the calendar of the month.
Okay.
That's what we have been doing for us. We still follow that the same way or pattern. There's no meteorological system here, so we just do it on our own observation.
Interesting. It reminds me of here too. There's like certain flowers or other things that'll come out or bloom or certain birds that will nest. And those are kind of what give the cues for fire. So like you said, not depending on, a specific date or month, but more just on those observations around you.
Quite true. Yes, you brought up a very important point regarding the flowers and the birds that lay. And so for all of those things, we put in, and we try not to burn at those times, especially in the month of March, April, where the systems start to lay, and where their habitats should not be destroyed. So those are places that should not be burned. But in general, some people burn also like to rejuvenate, like to beautify the place and so forth.
The one thing that kind of perked my ears up was when you were talking about burning riversides for iguana. Can you speak a little bit more? I think that the listeners that listen to this podcast will be quite interested in that. We've talked a little bit before about burning and the relationship to water. But yeah, I'm quite interested in that point.
Alongside the river would be grass, thick grass, and then when the iguanas go to lay, the reason for burning that is to get heat, the sunlight, so to get the iguanas hatch. And some people also eat those eggs, harvest some of the eggs. So there is a reason for burning for the iguanas. That's for the sunlight to heat the soil for it to hatch. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, here sometimes one of the reasons for burning too is for many communities is to help with the fish spawn. So, to keep waterways open and also sometimes they'll burn so that you get smoke so that it cools the water to make it the right temperature for the fish spawn. So anyways, it's pretty cool. Like I think many people don't realize that more holistic relationship of fire to the landscape.
Yeah, that's quite true. At this time of the year, the fishes have finished spawning now. Now is they really spawn in May month. Now is June. So where we're situated, the Rupununi River, the Sakatu, and the Esquibo. So this part are more up topside. You call it is the headwaters of Guyana. So we talked about that, the spawning there is very important for the fishes to go up to spawn. And right now they're actually coming down after spawning.
So Kayla, I'm wondering, so what's next for you with your research project? Kind of what stage are you on right now? And what's up for the future?
So currently I'm just trying to, I have all my interviews to sort of finalize, by that I mean sort of transcribe, going through like my coding, looking through what was talked about and trying to pull out what little pieces would work for parts of the argument or the question that I'm looking at. So I'm hoping to do that this summer and then start writing in September. So my timeline is to submit next year, September 2023. Yeah, losing track of time here. And hopefully defend successfully in December, but I'll probably be going home after my hand-in, which would be in September next year. But I'll go home this December again. So I think in the long term, after my research and my hand-in, which, well, currently, like I mentioned, it's just all sort of trying to pull it together and start writing, basically. Mm-hmm. But I'm really lucky to have Jay as a supervisor. She has a lot of knowledge, but she's very good at also guiding you. Yeah. Yeah, so I think in the long term, I don't really have any really strong plans, but I think I didn't think that I liked working on fire so much at the beginning, and I think that I've gotten a lot more interested in it because growing up in the Rupununi fire, as Nicolas has mentioned as well, is just part of everyday life, and the savanna burns, so it's not like a big thing. The people react more strongly like when the forest burns or the mountain burns. Then it's usually like a bigger kind of reaction to that. But the more I understand about fire, the more I see like the critical role it just sort of plays and the links that it has to not just wildlife, the habitat, with people, and everything. So I think that maybe I might want to work on see if I could get a longer term research sort of project or anything going longer term to understand a little bit better about fire in that specific region in the Rupununi. But I'm definitely going back home. That's for sure. Yeah. Would like to definitely work in something along, continue to work with Indigenous communities and natural resource sort of governance and management, which I think fire will play a critical role in. So I hope to be able to play my part in, responding to what people want for the development of the Rupununi.
Yeah, that's awesome. And reading background for this too, I was reading about the big problem with brain drain in Guyana, as they call it. Where I think it's at 80% of people who are educated to a certain level end up leaving the country. So yeah, it'd be fantastic if you could take your knowledge and stuff back home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's and this is really true for a lot of Indigenous communities as well. A lot of the youth that get trained or have skills, they end up kind of leaving, specifically because there's no opportunity in the Rupununi and the conservation group that Nicolas spoke of, and I think the SRDC as well. Both sort of recognize that and have been trying to create roles for young people in natural resource management through rangers or monitors, local project managers, and trying to bring back a lot of the control of any projects that are done or any jobs that are open to sort of more local people. And that's really difficult because it's not a lot of opportunity and the times are changing, and it's really a little bit of a juggling kind of thing, I guess, to try to maintain sort of traditional practices, but also keep with the times in a way so that you're able to communicate. But I think in the end, to bring it back to fire management and Indigenous people's rights, I think in terms of self-determination, I think, Indigenous peoples have, at least in Guyana context as well, you have a lot of rights over your land. And in many ways, while it's not perfect, there's a lot of strength within that. And the SRDC and organizations like that lend a lot of strength to being able to say what rules you want for your community, looking back and being like, this traditional practice is something worth revitalizing or bringing back on the land, or this is not something that's going to work anymore, but we think that this can work. You have a lot of rights to that sort of way. And I mean, a lot of arguments are around that, about what is traditional, what isn't traditional, and can Indigenous peoples sort of maintain being traditional, having traditional practices, but yet, responding to current climate or socioeconomic sort of realities. And I think, yes, because at the end of the day, you have a right to decide what you want in terms of fire management for your land. You have a right to say, this type of burning practice should maintain, but we shouldn't continue this type of conversation. And what Nicolas is talking about, that drive towards having more communal discussions, talking at the community level about what is good and what should be done in terms of fire governance, I think is really important for the future.
Yeah, great summary. Thanks, Kayla. I totally agree with you on that. There's often, for Indigenous people, such pressure, to lose that traditional lifestyle. But I think for the nations that I work with, there's people who are just so beautifully able to walk in both worlds, kind of. So maintaining that connection to their land, but then also being on Facebook and things like that too, with the different worlds. So Nicolas, I'm wondering too, what's up for you next? Are you continuing your work there with the SRDC?
Yes, I'm part of them. I'll continue to work with them. I'll continue to do my traditional farming. I will continue to help the youth because I do some weaving, and I think that's one of the things that is kind of fading away. So SRC has been helping the youth to go back to traditional knowledge passed on, weaving mat weaving this, doing some craft work, and so I'll continue to assist them in whatever way I can. I will continue to work them. I'll continue to help the SRDC to keep doing their projects. Right now we're actually on the giant armadillo project, and it has been approved by the villages, the giant amphitheater. So it's kind of like sustainable wildlife management, sustaining your land, getting rights over your land, and just our way of life to keep educating the youth and so forth. So yes, I will continue to work with both of the organizations.
Awesome.
And probably have to respond to me when I'm in the middle of an interview. Nicolas, what does this mean? Help me. I mean,
Yeah, that's good though. That's a good friend.
I mean,
Sorry, go ahead, Nicolas.
I think we had we had a very good discussion. I think when Kayla at first asked someone to assist her with research, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I think it was a very intense research, and I think I gained a lot of knowledge working with her. Mm-hmm. And here I am with you, Amy. I really appreciate our sharing here. And thank you so much for having me and having you both over there. And I really appreciate the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas. I think you're honestly probably our guest who's made the biggest effort to come and participate on the podcast. So I thank you so much for that, for taking the time, to come into, a better internet connection so that you can participate. And thank you, Kayla, as well, for setting up this call. I love the work, obviously, that Jay does and yourself. Great to connect and hear more about it. So thanks to you both.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We hoped you enjoyed that. Thanks for sticking through it. We know that the audio might have been difficult for some, but yeah, what Nicolas had to say, and like Amy said before, the lengths he had to go through to share his story with us. We're so thankful that he spent that time to do that, because it was worth it. So thank you.
Yeah, I loved hearing too about Kayla's research. I mean, the stuff like just the fact that she's from Guyana and has gone back to do her studies. And like we talked about in the podcast, there's a brain drain kind of from the country where highly educated people tend to leave. So the fact that she's gone back and is doing so much work there is fantastic as well.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's really, really cool.
And also, I should note too, there's one funny thing about this episode. So this was crowdsourced on Twitter, this one. So really? I had put out a call on Twitter, cause we had a different contact that we were trying to get in touch to. But again, there was difficulties with internet and things. So I'd put out a call saying, does anybody have, doing any cool work, know of anyone working in Indigenous fire, that's not in Canada, US, or Australia? As much as we love those countries, most of our episodes tend to feature folks from there. So we wanted some different perspectives. And so it was great. Kayla reached out, and other people also gave some excellent ideas and things, and ended up working out with Kayla. So thanks, Kayla, for responding to that tweet, and everybody else who responded as well.
Yeah, very, very cool. I like it. We're reaching into the Twitterverse now. Awesome. Okay, so our next two episodes are very special. We've got two folks on, and we actually split it into two episodes because there was just so much going on, so much to say, and they're going to be the last two. I'll let Amy dive into that a little bit, because she can put the exclamation mark on a little better than I can.
Yeah. So we finally have Victor Stephenson on the Good Fire podcast. So for people who are in this community, everyone knows Victor. He's with the Fire Sticks Alliance group, wrote the book Fire Country, has been working in this area forever, like longer than before it was popular and had attention. And so it was great to feature or to have Victor, and so glad that he could make the time for it. And thanks to Rachel for helping us to set it all up. And then also what I wanted, because, Victor talks about fire a lot. And so I didn't want for him this just to be another interview talking about cultural burning, but I really wanted him to talk about mentorship, because he's doing so much mentorship in the Fire Sticks community. And so Ado Webster is also coming on the episode, and Ado is fantastic as well, like a young Indigenous man who's with the Fire Sticks Alliance now. And I mean, Ado just had amazing stories, and anyway, so that's why we have it split into two episodes, because there was really not very much we could cut from it.
No. Yeah, Ado was very impressive for being someone that's relatively new to this world, right? And he just he obviously, you could see the pride in Victor's face as we were talking to him, right? And just how excited he was. And he sounds like Ado sounds like somebody who's been doing it for decades. So it was a great two episodes. You're all going to love it for sure, without a doubt. So that's it. We'll see you guys next week. Victor and Ado, and the week after that, same folks. So thanks a lot for listening. Make sure to share and review and all that good stuff on Spotify and Apple and social media. We appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time. A huge thank you to Canada Wildfire for their support of this podcast. As well, we would like to thank the Fighting Gunditjmara for allowing us to share their fire song Ween as the official song of Good Fire Podcast.